What's up, NBA fan? What's up, all sports fans? It's your boy JB, host of the Behind the Bench podcast networking channel. Just wanted to give a shout out to the rest of the crew. I'm talking about Shy, Kelvin, and Jermaine. And for everyone who's tuning in, hope that you support Behind the Bench, become a subscriber, and help make this show the best that it can be. Wow. Now, this is a topic that I discussed last year, probably about 4 months ago. I just want to reiterate something. As a lot of accounts, historical accounts about the NBA's past has been seriously misrepresented over the course of the past 5 years or so in a terrible way. And the pundits that do this, they don't realize how much harm they're actually doing to the league. And the difference between how the NBA, I'm talking about when it comes to influential voices, how the NBA is presented now versus then is just a tremendous difference. It's a tremendous difference. And the bar has been lowered. Because anytime you have to diminish the past to justify the current time, then there is a very ominous dilemma that currently exists, ironically. So what I'm getting at is, every time you watch an NBA game, just about every time you watch an NBA game now, and the announcing crew or, post-game coverage or whatnot, whether it's on radio, TV, and they always say today's players are so much more skilled. It's like they're comparing. They don't let the present exist on its own. They always have to compare it to the past. Oh man, players from the '80s, they couldn't play in today's game. Why not? You ask the question. You seriously say why not? The court is the same dimensions. It's like 46 by 92, 46 feet wide by 92 feet long. The rim has been 10 feet. 10 feet from the court, like from the court surface. Let's just say 10 feet high. It's been 10 feet high forever. Probably since the league started. They've been playing with a leather basketball for decades and decades and decades and decades and decades. So I'm trying to figure out what's so different. Now, of course, the three-point shot has become more prevalent over time. But that's just one facet of basketball. The object is still the same. Who can score the most points and who can stop the other team from scoring. That's an all sport, team sport. So that hasn't changed. So I'm just trying to figure out. And so, like I said, what I like to do when I do my videos, I like to set a backdrop and, kind of paint a picture. So people who listening, can understand where I'm coming from. But when you, especially if you was a kid coming up, a teenager, and you start watching the NBA, following the NBA during the '80s. But first of all, the majority of the people who covered the NBA during that time, they were directly involved in the league, whether they were a former player, former executive, former coach, or a reporter who covered the NBA team. So the coverage was more authentic. You didn't really have narratives back then. If someone hadn't won yet, ultimately they had to win. What I mean by that, I mean in a way where they're the driving force as to why their team won. That's what I'm talking about. I ain't talking about stacking the deck, joining forces. I'm not talking about that. So one of the controversial topics that started to really gain momentum is about NBA expansion, right? Particularly during the late 80s, 90s. And they'll say, well, the expansion during that time diluted the league. It sounds good. If they say it often enough from an agenda based perspective. So what I'm getting at is, when you think about it, if a league expands and add additional teams at any time, that means that the league is sound enough and viable enough in order to reach that conclusion that more teams can be added without compromising the level of competition or the level of play, right? NBA once had 8 teams in it, right? Then it expanded like from 8 teams to like 12, 14 teams. And then the number of teams that were added during the 70s were exponential due to the merger, right? When the ABA disbanded in 1976, a lot of those teams, like the Denver Nuggets, who start off as an ABA team, the San Antonio Spurs, who start off as an ABA team, the Indiana Pacers, who start off as an ABA team, they were all added to the NBA. They all merged and became full-fledged NBA franchises, right? Okay. Did that dilute the level of competition during the 70s when no teams were added? I don't think so. So it's really a misnomer. But now check this out. The league is talking about expanding, adding a team in Las Vegas, and trying to reestablish a franchise in Seattle that hosted the Supersonics for all them years and decades, where they won a championship back in 1979, and where Kevin Durant was drafted in 2007. You know what I mean? They have a rich tradition, right? Went to the finals in 1996, right? They had a lot of great teams throughout its existence in Seattle. So if you add a team in those two cities, will that dilute the product? Will that water it down? Will that be criticized decades after the fact? Where they'll say, well, the 2020s became diluted because they added expansion teams during that stretch. See, it doesn't make any sense. So the reason why they're trying to downgrade the competition in the 90s and say the expansion during that period was weak is because they're trying to downgrade the impact and the success of Michael Jordan. And the fact that he won 6 championships in 8 years, from 1991, 1992, 1993, retirement to go play baseball, returned back with months to go during the 94-95 season, and then he goes on to lead the Bulls to a second three-peat, 96, 97, 98. So they're trying to attribute that to expansion, that the league was watered down and all this stuff. But once again, it sounds good. That don't make it true, though. And I'm going to tell you why. If you really look at it, the NBA expanded by 4 teams. They added 4 teams to the league from beginning in 1988. They added 2 teams, and I believe those teams were the Miami Heat and the Charlotte Hornets. And then in 1989, 2 more teams were added, the Orlando Magic and the Minnesota Timberwolves, right? Okay. Okay, so by let's say 1992, right? The Lakers would have to begin to rebuild. Magic Johnson retired in 1991, right? James Worthy retired from the Lakers in 1993. Played his whole career for the Lakers. Uh, Byron Scott uh, reestablished his career playing for the Indiana Pacers and Reggie Miller, right? Once Showtime officially ended by the time James Worthy retired in 93. So I can go on and on, right? The Detroit Pistons, after Isaiah Thomas retired in 1993, and when he retired, the Pistons only won 20 games. The Pistons only won. They last good season where they was playoff level was in 1992. They won 48 games, and they lost to the New York Knicks in the first round, best 3 out of 5 series, right? Where it was a very physical series, and the Knicks, you know, it was like the Pistons going against the Pistons on the court, but one of those teams would represent the city of New York. That's how much similar in style they were when they faced each other. So what I'm saying is, you see a pattern. Lakers had to start over by 93. The Pistons didn't really start over until after they drafted Grant Hill in 1994. And the Boston Celtics, after Larry Bird retired and after Reggie Lewis, who was a tremendous basketball player. Reggie Lewis, the way he played the game, is like his playing style. He actually, looking back on it, he reminded me of the way Kawhi Leonard plays, his playing style. They played very similar. But nonetheless, when he passed unexpectedly, your three staple franchises of the 80s, Lakers, Celtics, Pistons, all pretty much had to start over again. So Pistons in Boston was near the bottom of the Eastern Conference. The Lakers, by 1994, they did begin to reestablish themselves and emerge as a playoff level team with Nick Van Exel, Eddie Jones, right? But do you know the teams that took their place in terms of stature and prowess and popularity and success, as far as uh, being successful on the court? It was expansion teams. And like I said, I'm not trying to draw this out, but when it comes to something like this, is very important. I believe it's very important to really break things down in nuance, right? Okay, so when they say the NBA diluted the talent pool, it really didn't, because when expansion started in 1988, there were no teams out there that made, if they had a superstar on their team, which most teams did back then, they did not make any superstar available for expansion. It was mainly role players or older veterans or reserves who were made available in expansion. It wasn't the superstars. So if you had a team that consisted of a 9-10 man rotation, you went from a 9-10 man rotation to about an 8-man rotation, an 8 or 9 man rotation. Now remember, the league had about 24 teams before they started adding those expansion teams. You had like 12 teams in the East, you had 12 teams in the West, and you had 2 divisions in each conference. You see what I'm saying? So the talent pool was not diluted when it came to stars. But guess what? It gets deeper. The 4 American led expansion teams, Miami Heat, Orlando Magic, the Charlotte Hornets, and the Minnesota Timberwolves, 3 of those teams became playoff level within 3 years of their existence on average. But guess what? Most of your top collegiate players in the country, when they enter the pros, from Shaquille O'Neal to Penny Hardaway to Dennis Scott, he was part of the Dennis Scott played at I believe that was Georgia Tech with Kenny Anderson down there. And I believe they did go to a Final Four when Kenny Anderson was one of the, arguably he was the top player in the country when he was recruited by I believe that was Georgia Tech. Yeah, Georgia Tech. Kenny Anderson in '89, he was the number one player in the country coming out of high school. So people like that. Now Kenny Anderson was drafted by, I believe Kenny Anderson was drafted by the New Jersey Nets. But from Shaquille O'Neal to Penny Hardaway to Nick Anderson to Dennis Scott, that was in Orlando. And then Charlotte, Alonzo Mourning, people like Muggsy Bogues, Kendall Gill, Larry Johnson, Grandmama. Now remember, Larry Johnson played for the famed UNLV Running Rebels. And they won a national championship in 1990. And in the following year, in 91, they was undefeated going into the tournament. And they reached the Final Four before they got upset by Duke. Where if they would have repeated, you as an undefeated team, UNLV arguably would have went down as the greatest college basketball team we've ever seen. So Larry Johnson, Lonzo Mournings of the world, Kendall Gills, they got drafted by Charlotte. Then in Miami, Glenn Rice won a national championship with University of Michigan in 1989, right? And they drafted Rodney Cycli, was like a 2-time All-American from Syracuse. Syracuse was a perennial powerhouse in what used to be the Big East Conference, right? And then you had Steve Smith out of University of Michigan State. See what I'm saying? Sherman Douglas, right? People like that. So what I'm saying is a lot of I'm talking about top level college players entering the pros, they were drafted by the expansion teams. Shaquille O'Neal was drafted by the Orlando Magic in 1992. And he led them to a 41-41 record in his rookie season and was within games of advance to the playoffs. But nonetheless, they broke even. So and this is before they got Penny Hardaway the next year, where they won 50 games. And they made their first playoff appearance. Do you know who didn't make the playoffs in 1993? Not doing the 92, 93, yeah. Now let's say the 93-94 season. The Lakers didn't make the playoffs. The Celtics didn't make the playoffs. The Pistons didn't make the playoffs. 3 staple franchise from the 80s did not make the playoffs. But you know who did make the playoffs? By 93-94? Do you know who did make the playoffs? The Miami Heat, as an expansion team, made their first playoffs in 1992. Within 3 years after his existence. When they debuted as an expansion team. And they faced the Chicago Bulls in the first round. Chicago did beat them in 3 games. And they swept them, but nonetheless, they made the playoffs. The Orlando Magic made their first playoff appearance in 1994. The Charlotte Hornets made their first playoff appearance in 1993. So those expansion teams were bona fide playoff teams. They didn't look like expansion teams no more. They was drafting, those 3 teams was bringing in some of the top collegiate players in the country when they went pro. Grandmama won Rookie of the Year on an expansion team. Averaged like 19 and 10. 19 and 12, something like that. I think it averaged like 19 points, about 12 rebounds. Rookie of the year, Alonzo Mourning, his rookie year, him and Shaq into the pros in the NBA the same season, 1992. Many people felt that Alonzo Mourning had a better record regular season than Shaquille O'Neal because Shaquille O'Neal, although they improved where they finished with 41 wins, but they did not reach the playoffs. Alonzo Mourning helped the Charlotte Hornets reach the playoffs in '93. Kendall Gill from the University of Illinois, they went to the Final Four to lose to Michigan Wolverines with Glenn Rice and Ramil Robinson, and they won the national title. So those expansion teams that these pundits talking about that was so bad, well, they better check again. Because check this out. The only team that the American led expansion team that took them a while to really get going were the Minnesota Timberwolves, who they drafted Kevin Garnett. They drafted Kevin Garnett in 1994, and they later on they brought in Stephon Marbury, right? And that duo, the Minnesota, they did not start reaching the playoffs probably till about, like later on that decade. But I will say that the two Canadian expansion teams, the Vancouver Grizzlies and the Vancouver Grizzlies and the Toronto Raptors, they probably should have waited until the end of the 90s to add those teams. But the American expansion teams, it was perfect timing because the league was so profitable, the league was so viable, the league became so successful in the 80s, generated more and more viewership that it was opportune time to expand. That's why they did it. It was based off of the success of the 80s. They weren't trying to force the issue. That's what I'm trying to say. So, by 1995, the Orlando Magic, and tell you the truth, once they got Penny Hardaway along with Shaquille O'Neal, do you realize the Orlando Magic used to give the New York Knicks, the prime New York Knicks, fits during the regular season, where Orlando would beat the Knicks more than the Knicks would beat Orlando. That's how talented the Orlando Magic would start to become. And by 1995, the Orlando Magic, an expansion team, boasted the best starting five in basketball, and they advanced to their first ever NBA Finals appearance within 5 years of his existence. So that was not an expansion team no more. And actually, it really showed and attributes how much the NBA had elevated itself to become arguably the premier team sport league in the country. Now check this out, it gets even deeper. And I'm going to shut this down. Teams like the Charlotte Hornets, they became so popular, they were the first team, if I'm not mistaken, either them or Orlando, but I want to say it was the Charlotte Hornets. They the one who broke out with the pinstripe look on their jerseys. It became so popular, a lot of organizations followed suit, like the Indiana Pacers, the Magic, the Bulls when they broke out the pinstripes for the record-breaking 72-10 season of 95-96. By 1993, the Charlotte Hornets was leading the league in merchandise sales. Even more than the Chicago Bulls, who were back-to-back champions. I remember like it was yesterday. You couldn't buy enough jerseys or whatever it is you want to call it because those teams have reached playoff status. And they did it fast. It wasn't like it took like 7, 8 years. You know what I'm saying? They did it fast because those teams that I mentioned were drafted in big time players left and right. Left and right. So if anything, expansion, particularly in the Eastern Conference, because the Minnesota Timberwolves was placed in the Western Conference. The Miami Heat, Orlando Magic, Charlotte Hornets, Eastern Conference. Eastern Conference. And as Miami will continue to move forward, by 1997, they added and signed, they signed Alonzo Mourning to bolster that lineup, and they took their play to the next level. Do you realize that 97 Miami Heat team won 61 games and advanced to the Western Conference Finals only to lose to the defending champion Chicago Bulls? Lonzo Mourning in his prime, like I said, his rookie year, a lot of people thought he had a better rookie year than Shaquille O'Neal. But once he established himself in Miami, he was a perennial 20-point per game scoring, 10 rebounds per game having player. But they gonna say expansion diluted the product. No, it did not. What really has diluted the game was the super team. See, everything they trying to attribute negatively to Jordan's era, and like I said, I love watching the NBA today. I don't like to compare eras. You know what I'm saying? But in a lot of ways, a lot of problems that they are accusing the league of having in the 90s is actually taking place now. Because it's a byproduct of trying to trash the past, which you can't do. If you're gonna misrepresent the past and throw out misnomers and fake information, then don't talk about the past at all and let the past be. Because all that's going to do is upset fans who grew up during that time watching the NBA, and a lot of people are going to speak out against it. Because by season's end, the top level teams in the NBA back then, they still had to compete against each other for basketball supremacy. You see how that works? Like I said, the Orlando Magic was giving the New York Knicks fits during the regular season, and they would have trouble beating them. By 95, the Orlando Magic was said to have the best starting five in the league. Mainly via the draft, outside of Horace Grant, who signed as a free agent after the 93-94 season. So at the end of the day, I know, I may be flying off the handle a little bit, but in the end, a lot of stuff that they're saying about NBA expansion during that time is really a form of disrespect when you get down to it. Like, they can't talk basketball without focusing and trying to trash on the success of that man who won 6 titles, and they trying to misrepresent every facet of his career. And there's no need to do it. Expansion did not dilute the league. The super team era has. Just the irony of it all, man. Like I said, at the end of the day, I just want to throw it out there. Jordan would face a 60-win Orlando Magic team in 1996. The Bulls faced the Hornets in the first round of the 94-95 Eastern Conference. where they prevailed in 4 games, the Bulls, to advance to the next round. If Jordan won on that team in '95 versus Charlotte, Charlotte would have beat them. That's how much time they had. Look at the team like the Oklahoma City Thunder now. They tied in first place, maybe had game behind first right now. Uh, think of OKC as an expansion team. Then you would get a great idea as to how good the Miami Heat will become. That's why Miami Heat. That's why they became so popular, especially when Pat Riley took over the head coaching job and led them to the title in 2006. Well, do you know how long Pat Riley has been a fixture with the Miami Heat? That started in the late 90s when he was the head coach. I'm telling you. So, like I said, the NBA expansion during that time, it marked a great period. You didn't hear people talking about, oh man, the play is bad. You know what I'm saying? Now, like I said, expansion is more competitive than what people think because you that means that the league is in a viable position to grow and move forward. Now, at some point, they ain't gonna be able to add teams, just for the sake of be adding them. But I'm just saying, those teams play hell of a ball. And like I said, the Charlotte Hornets in 1993 generate the largest merchandise sales than any other team in the NBA. That's how popular it became. And they would play in that arena. They used to call it the Beehive. And it was raucous up in there. It was loud up in there. Kind of reminds you of Oracle Arena, Sacramento Kings back in 2002 when they had that famous playoff against the Lakers where the Lakers prevailed in 7 games. Expansion was competitive. And it did establish another level of competition throughout the league. I guarantee it. I remember watching it. So what they're saying about the league back then being watered down, not competitive, it's a misnomer. It's not true. It never was. And they're only doing it to try to diminish Michael Jordan. And you can't do that because Jordan was beating everybody out there. Not just the expansion team. He's beating long-standing franchises. He beat prime New York Knicks. Knicks never beat him in the playoffs. Indiana Pacers, they caught them too. You know what I'm saying? They would beat Detroit. Cleveland. I mean, so he feasted on everybody. That's why he won 6 championships, 6 Finals MVPs, no losses. That had nothing to do with him playing the expansion era. That's because his competitive nature in his clutch play when everything was on the line. So next time fans hear these talking heads speak speak down on those past teams, man, they need to take a page out of the proverbial book and just focus on the present, man. That's all they need to do. But the only reason they do it is because Jordan played in that era of basketball. You see? But at the end of the day, fans can go back and look. Those teams became good, and they became good fast. So much so that you had some basketball minds who felt that the Orlando Magic may become the team of the 90s. By the time they started making the playoffs, that's what they was calling the Orlando Magic until they ran to Michael Jordan in 1996. See, that's what it comes down to, man. And I think Jordan's catching so much negative feedback now because when you get down to it, he set the bar too high. See, he set the bar too high. Because it used to be considered better than Michael Jordan, people would say, well, you have to win 10 scoring titles like you did. This is even before you get to the championships. You have to be able to win the Defensive Player of the Year and be league scoring champion in the same year. We never seen that before. We never seen a player during any era lead the league in scoring and then win Defensive Player of the Year. Then the first player since Dr. J to gain at least 200 steals and 100 blocks in the same season. You see what I'm saying? That's another level. That's another level. So I just want to throw that out there, man. Expansion means that it's a good thing, not a bad thing. But they added the 2 Canadian expansion teams. They did add them too soon. They really should have waited till the beginning of the decade, but I guess they wanted to build off of the momentum, that steered from the late 80s up until like around 1995, But you take that Orlando Magic team that won 60 games in 96, and you put them in today's league, they gonna roll, and they gonna roll big time. Just like you got players who play now, they could have competed back then. See how easy that is? You ain't got to turn down either era. But now the super team eras devalued the league, not expansion. Because I guarantee if they do expand in the next couple years and that guy, I'm just being hypothetical, were to win, then they're not going to speak negatively on expansion then. They make it seem like, a team like the Bulls play an expansion team every night. That's the way they try to paint that picture. You know what I'm saying? And I just think it's crazy, man. But at the end of the day, that's where we at. And everything's getting devalued, man. Everything's getting devalued. The past and everything, they can't focus on the now. So they got to trash everything. That's why their assessment, that's why their analysis is off base right now. That's why the analysis, because I believe it's directly attributed to, as they say, what you give, what you receive. What you put out there, that's what you're going to get back. The boomerang effect. I just want to throw it out there. I thank everybody for tuning in. And until next time, this is JB for BTB, Behind the Bench.